Hey everyone, Mr. Macintosh here. If you've heard of OpenCore Legacy Patcher and installing a newer version of macOS on your older unsupported Mac, but want to give it a test drive first, this video is for you because I'm going to show you how to install OpenCore Legacy Patcher and a newer version of macOS on an external USB hard drive or Thunderbolt drive, or a separate volume or partition on your internal test drive. So again, you can just test it out first before you commit to installing it on your main hard drive. We got a lot to cover. Let's jump in and get started. Before we get started, I want to go over some really important pieces here because I want to explain a little bit more about what we're doing. What we want to do is install a newer version of macOS, whether it's Big Sur, Monterey, Ventura, or Sonoma, on our older unsupported Mac, which Apple does not allow to install anymore. For example, between 2008 and 2017, then you can do that with OpenCore Legacy Patcher. But a lot of people are a little bit uneasy about doing the install on their main device. So this video will show you how to install and test drive the entire process on an external hard drive or a USB flash drive, or on a separate volume on your hard drive. So again, if it doesn't work out, it's okay because you can just unplug the USB, or you can just remove the volume that you added, and then you're back to the same machine that you had before and everything's still there. Things always change with OpenCore Legacy Patcher and macOS all the time with technology. Make sure you check the update section in the description of this video because I always keep up-to-date detailed information down there if something changes or I need to let you know about something. Also, I always follow the official OpenCore Legacy Patcher documentation guide. The developers took a lot of hard time to put that developer guide together to be able to walk you through, and that's what I base all my walkthrough videos on. Even though what we're doing here is non-destructive, we are not erasing the drive, we are not touching the internal operating system, I always recommend backing up your drive. Just in case a mistake is made, it is always recoverable as long as you have a backup, and I recommend two sources. And again, I always say this in every video, bottom line is this is unsupported by Apple. So if you bring this machine in for repair, Apple's not going to support it at all because using OpenCore Legacy Patcher. But on the other side, you could argue that this machine is now more capable. And I'm also going to show you at the end of the video how to uninstall OpenCore Legacy Patcher from your EFI partition. Now let's move on to the equipment needed. Obviously, we're going to need an unsupported Mac from 2008 to 2007 plus, or a 40 gigabyte or larger USB. Now that's the bare minimum. Usually macOS will install on a 36 gigabyte hard drive as a minimum. So I'd recommend at the very least 40 gigabytes, but definitely 60 gigabytes or larger, just to give you a little bit of space to move with. When we talk about different drives, I recommend if your Mac supports Thunderbolt to try to have a Thunderbolt drive because that's going to be the fastest external drive that you can use to be able to run the operating system. Let's say you have a 2015 MacBook Pro and you try to use like a USB 2.0 flash drive, it's going to be extremely slow. I mean, it'll work to give you an idea how it installs, but it's not going to give you the full picture of the capabilities of OpenCore Legacy Patcher and a newer operating system because it's going to be limited by bandwidth. So again, I recommend using the fastest drive available if you're going to go the external hard drive route. Now, if you're doing the internal hard drive route with a second volume like we're going to talk about in the second part of the video, don't worry about that because that's all on your internal hard drive inside. Now, if you're using a 2010 Mac and below and you're using Ventura and above, you're going to need a USB 2.0 hub or an older 2008 Apple keyboard that supports a USB 2.0 to be able to do the install for the recovery partition and when you do install updates. So keep that in mind if you get into recovery and all of a sudden your keyboard and trackpad don't work on 2010 and below. And I also got a bunch of OpenCore Legacy Patcher links here at the bottom that you can follow if you need to. All right, let's get started. So what we are on here, our demonstration Mac here today, is a 2010 13-inch MacBook Air, which is a perfect example of wanting to be able to test OpenCore Legacy Patcher before maybe we commit. We're running macOS High Sierra, and that's the highest OS that this Mac will support. So we're going to install macOS Ventura on this on an external hard drive. This external hard drive is already plugged into the Mac here. First thing we're going to need to do is download OpenCore Legacy Patcher app. Keep in mind, I mentioned earlier in the video about installing on a second volume. That's going to be in the second part of this video, so skip to that if you want to be able to install on a secondary volume or a secondary partition on your main hard drive. So all we need to do is open up Safari and we will go to OpenCore Legacy Patcher's main page, Dortania GitHub.io OpenCore Legacy Patcher. We'll click on GitHub. We'll see the releases here. We want to click on the latest release that's available right here. Then we want to scroll down to our assets. Now, if for some reason you're using an older OS or an older browser and the assets are spinning here and it won't load this up, you have to download Firefox Legacy or use the link that I put in the description, which is a direct download link to this. And if you see the assets section here, you're okay. All you need to do is click on OpenCore Patcher GUI app.zip and click allow. and it's going to start to download to your downloads folder. We'll give it a second here. Okay, we just finished downloading and it jumped up and down in our downloads folder. So all we need to do is click on downloads folder and we'll see OpenCore Legacy Patcher application in the downloads folder. If we look at our Finder here or open up our Macintosh hard drive and see our listings, we can go to the downloads folder and we'll see the application in here. If you see the zip file in here, just double click on it. Usually the download will automatically unzip itself and put the app in here. And when it does, all you need to do is take it and drag it to your applications folder. And there it is. So we can click on applications, click on the O key, and brings us right to OpenCore Legacy Patcher. That's step one. We got the application downloaded and installed to our applications folder. Now what we're going to have to do is prepare the USB external hard drive or external Thunderbolt drive for preparation to be able to get OpenCore Legacy Patcher and the installer installed onto it. So all we need to do now is go to our utilities folder down here at the bottom. Double click on utilities and we'll open up disk utility. Now once disk utility is open, what we'll do here is we need to see all the volumes. So we'll click on view and we'll click show all devices. Now we can see the top level SSD in our internal drive, and we can also see our external Samsung SSD drive. And now we're going to need to format this drive. Now if you have anything on this USB drive, now's the time to back it up because we have to erase the entire drive. So what we'll do is we'll click on the top level drive right here. We'll click on erase and you want to see the three sections: name, format, and scheme. If you don't see the scheme, you probably clicked on here and you got to click on the top level, then you'll see the scheme. Because what we need to do is set it to macOS Extended Journaled, and we had to set the scheme to GUID partition map. Don't worry about the name because OpenCore Legacy Patcher app will change this later. All you need to do is click on erase. There we go, done. Now what we're going to do here before we get started, I want to put the USB drive here in Spotlight Indexing's privacy. So what this will do is that Spotlight will not try to index this external drive. So when you click on the privacy tab, just drag your USB into here, because what I've seen in the past is that when we try to create the installer, Spotlight's got a hold of this thing, and even though there's no folders or files on there, and it causes problems trying to erase the drive. Now keep in mind, the OpenCore Legacy Patcher app will erase the external drive for you, but doing this extra step here will save you some trouble later if the application has problems formatting the drive. So again, this might be an extra step that you're taking, but a lot of times it might save us some headaches later. So we can close on disk utility now. We'll go back into our hard drive and then we're going to open up OpenCore Legacy Patcher application. We'll click on O and it brings us right to the app and we'll fire it up. We'll click on open. Okay, our app is open, and the first thing we're going to do is build the macOS installer onto our USB drive. We're going to need this whether we are installing on our external drive, which is going to be this one, or if we're going to be installing macOS on a second volume in the next part of the video. So we need this no matter what. So let's click Create macOS Installer. Now when we go into here, we have two different options. We can download it from Apple servers, and we have multiple options, whether it's Big Sur, Monterey, Ventura, or Sonoma. Or we can use an existing installer. Like if you already have a copy already that you had downloaded before, you can select this. So when we click on download macOS installer, what's going to happen is it's going to pull all the available versions from Apple servers and display them here. These are the Apple supported versions and they'll show you, and you can click on any of these to immediately download. But we already have a copy on here to quicken things up a little bit today. So what we're going to do is we're going to return back to the main menu. We're going to click on installer and then we're going to click use existing installer applications folder because it's going to check there. It's already found that we have Ventura 13.5. We're going to select it and we are selecting our USB drive. It's already picked and selected. And then we are giving one final warning. If you have any data on here to pull it off, remember we already erased and formatted the disk with disk utility. Again, to possibly prevent any problems from this part, let's click on yes because we're going to erase the entire drive. And there it goes. It's going to erase after we type in our administrator password, and it's going to put the macOS Ventura installer onto the USB drive. And then after, it's going to install the OpenCore Boot Loader to the USB drive. So we're going to let this finish. This can take anywhere between 10 and 30 minutes depending on the speed of your drive. We are using a USB 3.0 external SSD drive, so this is actually going pretty quickly. We'll pick up right when this finishes. Okay, the macOS Ventura full installer has been installed onto our USB drive, and now OpenCore Legacy Patcher is validating the installer integrity, and we'll be back right after this part. Okay, the macOS installer was successfully created. Would you like to create and install OpenCore to our disk? Yes, we would. We'll click on yes. Now it's going to build the OpenCore Boot Loader, put it onto a temporary folder, and then it's going to install it onto our USB drive. We're going to click Install to Disk. Remember, disk 0 is always our internal hard drive. We are going to always see the external disks listed second, and this is our disk 2, our external SSD drive, USB. We're going to click on that. And our EFI. Type in our password. Now it's saying it's done. This here is a regular macOS Ventura OpenCore Legacy Patcher installer disk that we've always done whenever we do our normal walkthroughs. But this one's different because in the step 1, we are going to split this partition here on this USB drive and install macOS on it to test it out. If we don't want it or it doesn't work right or something, maybe our application is not compatible or something like that, we can always remove the USB and our Mac is just like it was. So we're going to click Ignore because we got more work to do. So we'll click Ignore here and then return to the main menu. Now what we're also going to do is open up our Spotlight again because we talked about the Spotlight indexing. We don't want to have any problems with that. So if we go back into our Spotlight here and then we click on Privacy, we're going to drag this back in there. And we did that before, but once we erase it again, that's why it's not listed here. So once we drop that in here, it will give it a second and it should register right here. And now Spotlight indexing won't try to index that drive right now because we don't want to cause any performance issues. So now that that's done, we can now partition this USB drive so we can install macOS on it. So we'll go into Macintosh hard drive and then utilities and then disk utility. Now make sure that the view is set up to show all devices. So you can click on there or in view, show all devices. And then you'll be able to see the external drive, the top level, and the partition. In this situation, we'll click on partition. Now this is where it can get a little bit frustrating. The bottom line is that we have to be able to add another volume or partition onto this USB drive. Now what happens is if we go into macOS recovery off the USB drive, sometimes there's partitioning errors because we're booted off of the USB installer and we're also trying to partition this drive at the same time. So that's why I want to try to do it in the operating system before we reboot to recovery. Once the volume's there, then we can erase it and do everything we want, but that is the key that we need to do here. So all we need to do is click on plus, but the problem is if we go very closely to the size, the disk utility has to resize and shrink the partition, and that can take a long time. So in this case, it's something around this percentage of the space where you do not get the resizing, and I'll show you what that looks like if you get that message. Now you can let this finish. It'll finish eventually when it's sitting in there in that shrinking file system mode. But for now, what I want to do is I don't want to sit here and wait for that. So about this percentage of the partitioning will not cause it to do that. So we're going to leave it on title and we're going to leave it on extended journal because we're going to erase it again in recovery. We'll click on apply and partition. Now, if you have trouble in this situation, it doesn't matter where you take this USB drive. You can bring it to a second Mac, you can boot to another Mac's recovery and do it. It doesn't matter. It just has to be added to that second volume. And this is why I talk about it. It can be a little bit frustrating. As you can see, there's no shrinking part here because we did it past that certain percentage. And sometimes disk utility can be very frustrating and unreliable, but this is what I've shown to be able to work. And you can see we'll wait till this fully loads and there it goes. It's successful. So now if you look at the partition map, we have this sole volume here that we're going to be able to install macOS Ventura on, and this is the macOS installer with OpenCore Legacy Patcher that we're going to boot to with the boot loader. So we're going to click on cancel, we'll close disk utility, and we're going to prepare to reboot. Let's go Apple to restart, and we're going to hold down Option. Keep holding Option. What we're going to do is select EFI Boot, continue holding Option, and then we're going to select Mac OS installer for Ventura or Monterey or whatever you're booting to. And then click Enter. You can click with your mouse button. Now we're going to boot into Mac OS recovery. Okay, we're in macOS recovery from the USB drive booted off OpenCore Legacy Patcher. So now we're going to click the next button, and now we're at the main menu. We'll give it a second to load. We're going to click on Disk Utility and click Continue. Now we're going to also make sure that our view is also showing all devices again, and now we can see the full loadout. We're not going to touch internal. We're not going to touch disk images because this is macOS recovery. We're going to concentrate on our external area. Now if you look here, we have our macOS install Ventura volume, and we also have our Untitled. So let's click on Untitled because we are going to erase this drive again, and we are going to format it in APFS. And we're doing that because there's changes to APFS during each macOS release, and we want to format it with the latest version of Disk Utility. So we're going to click on Erase, and then we are going to select APFS. And we're going to call it Macintosh Hard Drive External. And then let's hit Erase. And the erase process is complete. Click Done. And now if you look, we're going to click on our external. We can see our install macOS Ventura is here, and our secondary volume is erased and ready to go for macOS Ventura. Now we can click on Disk Utility and quit. And now we're back at the main menu. We can click on Install macOS Ventura, Continue, Continue, Agree. This is the important part. Notice how the icon is different for our internal drive, and we named it that before. That's what we saw when we were in Mac OS. Or it'll just say Macintosh hard drive, and you can actually see the different size. That's why we also renamed our second drive, so we can make sure we're not going to make a mistake on which drive we're going to install it. You can install it on the installer because you can see it's grayed out, so you don't have to worry about that. And it's a different icon. So we know this is our external drive. We're going to click on it and click on Continue. And there it goes. It's going to copy the macOS installer files to the external drive partition, and then it's going to reboot to start the installation. And we'll pick up right when that's finished. Now this is the part where it could get a little bit tricky, because what happens is that after the first reboot, installer has a hard time trying to get to the OS installer here in the external hard drive. So if it gets stuck and it doesn't reboot back up, all you need to do is power it down, power it back up, hold down the Option key, and this is the menu that you should see. Your internal hard drive that we're not touching. Install macOS Ventura, our EFI Boot Loader for OpenCore Legacy Patcher, and the macOS installer. This is what we need to boot to be able to continue the installation. So what we want to do is continue holding down Option and select EFI Boot, and then click macOS installer. Now it's going to boot to the next part of the installation process, which is actually starting the installation of macOS Ventura to the external hard drive. So we're going to let this boot up a little bit, and it should show a progress bar with an estimated time that it'll take to do the installation. Now keep in mind, this installation can reboot up to 5 separate times. So that's where a lot of people get hung up, because it needs to reboot back to the macOS installer part maybe at least 2 to 3 times, and we're going to follow each step of this process until we get the full installation. So we're going to let this go until it gets to the installation part, and then we'll pick up at the next part. Okay, we got our progress bar, and now we have our estimated time remaining. We're going to let this part continue, and we'll pick up after the next reboot. We are less than a minute remaining until our next reboot. We're going to let it reboot. We'll give this a little bit, and we'll let it reboot on its own. Okay, it rebooted again, and again it did not boot up correctly. We're going to have to power down and power back up with the Option key. Okay, we're back up. We're going to select EFI Boot again. Keep holding down Option, and we are going to select macOS installer again. Okay, now it's going to go to the next part of the installation. We're going to let that continue again. And just if you're keeping track, this is now the second reboot, and then we're going to go to the third after this. Okay, now we are on our third reboot, and we held down Option again, and notice there's a change. Instead of macOS installer, we're now at the Macintosh HD External, so it's changed the name of the drive and shows that it's ready to boot. But we still have to boot via the OpenCore Boot Loader, so we have to select that, then click Macintosh Hard Drive External. So we'll click on EFI Boot, keep holding down Option, and then make sure we select Macintosh Hard Drive External. We're going to boot up from the external hard drive. Okay, now we are on our fourth reboot, and we are going to again select EFI Boot and Macintosh Hard Drive External. Okay, now we're in a very important process here. We can see this 1% completed automatic patcher is being installed as a package. And what that's going to be able to allow us to do is that once we get it to the setup assistant, some of the drivers for the graphics acceleration will already be installed, so we won't have to clodge through the setup assistant where it's super slow because it's not accelerated. Okay, we're on our 5th reboot. Select EFI Boot and then Macintosh hard drive external. Okay, we are at the setup position window. It's not kicking the screen over to the capture card or the screen sharing yet because I don't have an account created, but you are saying welcome to macOS Ventura here. Walk through the setup, create a local account, and as soon as we get to the desktop, we'll continue on. Okay, we are back up on macOS Ventura with OpenCore Legacy Patcher booted off a USB external hard drive. Now, before we even begin, I need to make a really important note about the performance. I mentioned earlier in the video that we have to keep an eye on the performance. This is not going to be the same performance that you would expect for an operating system that is running off the internal hard drive. For example, this 2010 MacBook Air is only USB 2.0, even though in the beginning of the video I mentioned that we should have a 3.0 USB drive or faster. 2011 and below have USB 2.0. In 2012, Apple added 3.0, so it's going to be a lot faster. 2011, Apple added Thunderbolt, so if you have a Thunderbolt drive, it's going to be a lot faster than USB 2.0. 3.0 on 2012 and newer and Thunderbolt will be a lot faster than this USB 2.0 on older Macs. Now that that's out of the way, if you're seeing this is slow, remember this is only to be testing, and then you can still do the second part of the video, which is installing it on a internal volume to get a little bit more speed and a better idea of the real world speeds here. Let's continue and finish out this external drive. So you can see that I have Finder in my options here under settings to show the hard disk and external drives. So you can see the main disk that's always being booted is here at the top. When you do the sorting for view and you click sort by the name. So now that we have that, we can still see our internal hard drive. In our external USB drive, we can double click on it to go in, and then we can go into applications and we can open up OpenCore Legacy Patcher. You'll see the little bitty alias right here with the arrow, but this is a direct link to the application. We'll open it up. Now that we're in, we can check out the post-install root patches. So let's click that now. Now you can see that all applicable patches are already installed, and you can see the date that we installed them. So we're good to go because the automatic patching system did work just fine. So we can now return to the main menu. And the other thing is that we do not have to build and install OpenCore because this is all already set up on the USB drive. So this machine is ready to go, and you can test it out and see how it is. The only other thing we have to talk about is when we boot up the Mac. Now when we're booting from an external hard drive, sometimes you actually have to boot it up with the Option key to be able to select it because it doesn't want to automatically select the external USB hard drive. So let's take a quick look at that so you have a proper understanding of that. So we're going to shut this Mac down, and then we're going to power it up by holding down Option. Okay, we booted it up after powering it off, and now we see this familiar screen. Now normally what you can do is hit the control key and see how it turns to a circle. That's setting it to the default boot disk. So we're going to do that now just in case anyway. Hit enter, and then it's going to bring us to the next screen. Do it again, it's going to turn to a circle, and hit enter. That should set the default hard drive when you fire up your Mac to boot from the external USB hard drive or Thunderbolt drive. But on some machines that just does not work. So when you fire it up, you'll just get a blank screen and nothing will happen. So you'll have to start it up holding down Option and manually select this. And again, we're not normally going to be running our Mac for daily use like production, watching videos and doing heavy duty stuff off of an external drive. We're usually doing this to be able to just test to see how the system is. You can test your applications, you can test compatibility and stuff like that. That's why we're going to do in the next part, we're going to install it on a second volume on the internal hard drive, and the performance is going to be a lot better than what it is now booting off the external USB. So we'll let this boot up and then we'll get started on that. Okay, one more thing before we go into step 2, installing in the internal secondary volume. I want to show you that when you're done testing Ventura and OpenCore Legacy Patcher on an external drive, I want to show you how to boot back into the original drive. So what we're going to do is we're going to shut down the Mac, and then we are going to disconnect the USB drive, and then we're going to hold down Option while we're powering up the Mac. So we're going to shut down now. Okay, the Mac's now powered off. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the USB drive. Okay, the USB drive is removed. Now we're going to power on the MacBook, and we're going to hold down Option. And there it is. All that we see is our original hard drive with macOS High Sierra on it. Now all we need to do is hold down Control to make it the default drive, even though it's the only one there. We'll hit Enter, and we'll get it to boot right back up to macOS High Sierra like nothing happened. The internal EFI wasn't modified, and the system is exactly like it was when we first started. And that's the beauty of testing it out on an external hard drive. All right, so now that that's complete, it's time to go into option number 2. We are going to install macOS Ventura on our internal volume on a secondary partition or volume. The way we're going to do that is we're going to use our USB drive that we just built. We don't even have to modify this. We're going to just go back to the one we just built early in the video, and we're going to boot to it the recovery partition. We're going to split the drive into 2 partitions, and then we are going to install macOS Ventura. So now all we need to do with our USB drive plugged in again, we will go up to the Apple, and we're going to restart. And then we're going to hold down Option. Now we're going to select EFI Boot while holding down Option again. Going to continue holding down Option. And then we're going to select Install macOS Ventura. Okay, we're in macOS Recovery, booted off the USB installer for OpenCore Legacy Patcher and Ventura. We'll click on Next. And then we are going to go into the disk utility to be able to partition the internal drive this time. Click on disk utility and then continue. Now once in, we're going to again make sure that we click on View and then click on Show All Devices. Remember, before in the first part we modified the external, but this time we are going to modify our internal. Now I want to make one more call for a backup of your drive just in case something goes wrong. Again, we are not touching this operating system. All we're going to do is add an additional partition here, but if something does go wrong, I want you to make sure that you have your backup all saved just in case. So now we have that covered. All we need to do now is click on the top level drive and then click on Partition. Now you can see here that this much of the hard drive is already used with data, but that's okay because we don't need that much space to be able to install macOS Ventura to be able to test. So now all we need to do is click on the Add button here, and then what we do have now is 2 different options. We can add a partition or we can add a volume. Let me explain the difference between the 2 really quick. The partition will add a whole separate partition here that is totally separate from the first partition with macOS High Sierra. Adding a volume will basically share the free space between macOS High Sierra and macOS Ventura. I would like to recommend the Add Partition because this is going to be a lot newer version of APFS, and I want to keep things separated. If something goes wrong in this one, I don't want it to actually modify or be any intermingled with the volume, even though Add Volume works just fine and it may work just fine for you. So I want to click on Add a Partition. Now it's saying for the size, but if I select here, I'm not going to have any extra free space for our High Sierra installer. So let's bring this down to about 41 or so. That should be plenty of space for our macOS Ventura test. What we're going to do is we're going to call it Mac HD 2 so we can tell the difference between Macintosh hard drive and our internal secondary partition. And we're going to leave the format APFS. And let's click Apply. And then Partition. And this may take a little bit of time. Just give it the time to finish properly, and then we'll pick up as soon as it finishes here. I'll click on Done. And now we can quit Disk Utility. Now at the back of the main menu, we can click on Install macOS Ventura. Continue. Agree. Now we're back at the selection screen. We are going to select Macintosh HD 2, which we named the second volume, and we'll click on that, and we'll click Continue. And there we go. Now this is going to copy all the files to the internal drive, and then we're going to reboot. Now, just like we talked about installing macOS on an external hard drive, the secondary volume might cause trouble with the booting of the installation. Now, some Macs might be able to boot just fine through the whole installation and boot right to the setup assistant when it's done, going through the 4 or 5 separate reboots. But if this thing reboots and it goes to a black or a gray screen, then you're going to have to power down, power back up, and then hold down Option key for EFI Boot and then select macOS installer 2 or 3 times to continue the installation until it says Mac HD 2 or whatever you name it. Then you can boot to that and we'll be at the setup system window. Now we're going to follow through so you can see what we do here, and then I'll pick up after our first reboot. Okay, we are on our first reboot, and just like I mentioned, it was not able to automatically boot to the macOS installer. So at our gray screen, or you might see a black screen, it's unable to pick the startup disk, so we have to power down, power back up, hold down Option, we'll be able to continue. Okay, we're powering back up, holding down Option here. Now keep in mind, your Mac model might be able to do it. So if you're already booted to the next part and it's installing, don't worry about it. If yours doesn't and it gets stuck like mine, you have to hold down the Option key like we said, and we'll have to select with the mouse EFI Boot or just click Enter because it's already selected there, and then hit Enter, and then we're going to select macOS installer and then Enter. This is going to the next part. It's going to start the installation process, and then we're going to reboot 3 to 4 more times. Okay, it's installing, and we'll be right back after our second reboot. Okay, we're on our second reboot. We will select EFI Boot again, and then we will select macOS installer. And we'll be right back after it reboots to go to our third restart. Okay, we are on our third reboot. We will select EFI Boot again, and this time around though, the install macOS is done, and now we're going to select Mac HD 2, and it will continue with the configuration of macOS, and we will be back in just a little bit for the fourth restart. Okay, we're on our fourth and final reboot, EFI Boot again, and Mac HD 2. Now this part, it's going to boot up and then install the OpenCore Legacy Patcher automatic patching system. So once we get to the setup assistant, the graphics acceleration drivers will be installed. So the entire setup assistant process will be accelerated and you'll be all set to go by the time you get to the desktop. Now it's installing the automatic root patcher. This will take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes depending on the speed of your Mac. Okay, now we are in our fifth and final reboot, EFI Boot again, and then Mac HD 2. We should boot up to our Setup Assistant window. We're at the Setup Assistant window. The capture card's not grabbing it right now, but you'll see Welcome to Mac OS. You can create your local account, and then once you're on the desktop, we'll pick up there. After going through the Setup Assistant, we are now on the desktop. We made it to Mac OS Ventura or Mac OS Sonoma or any Mac OS version that you wanted to install. What you should see is this screen right here. OpenCore Legacy Patcher has detected that you are booting from OpenCore from a USB or external drive. Would you like to boot your Mac normally without a USB drive plugged in? You can install OpenCore to your internal drive. Would you like to launch the OpenCore Legacy Patcher install to disk now? Yes, we would. Click OK. Now, if you don't get that message after about 5 minutes of the system being up, you can go into the Finder, into Applications folder, and open up the OpenCore Legacy Patcher app. And then you'll click Install Root Patches over here, the first option. But you should see this, and once we're done, click on Install to Disk. The blue states which disk we're booted from, and that's disk 3, the USB. We want to install to our internal disk 0. Usually disk 0 is always our internal hard drive, and that's where we want to install. So we'll click on disk 0 and our EFI. Our password. And we're done. Reboot. Restart. Now we're going to have to hold down the Option key. We're going to select the internal hard drive. Now we're going to unplug our USB drive right now. Now the USB drive is unplugged. We're holding down Option. And now you'll see that the logo for the drive has switched from a USB orange drive to an internal SSD hard drive icon. We will hit Enter or click on the arrow here, and then we will click on Mac HD 2. And now it's going to boot up every time with the Boot EFI OpenCore Boot Loader and boot to macOS. So we'll give it a second and it's going to boot to our desktop, and then we'll be able to check the root patches after. What I like to do is go to Finder, click on Settings, and then select Show the Hard Disks and Connected Servers. We'll close this. And I also like to click on View and then Sort by Name, and then usually the Macintosh hard drive that you're booted to is always at the top. So we can go inside here and we can see our applications, and then we can see our OpenCore Legacy Patcher application. We'll double click on that. Now to check the post-install root patch, all you need to do is click on this button here, and then it'll make sure everything's installed properly when you get to the next menu. And there it is, all applicable patches already installed, and it'll show the date when they were installed. If you see anything there that needs to install, you can click on Install Root Patching and it'll finish that piece up. If the system is running a little bit slow, or you hear the fans kicking up, or it's getting a little warm, that's okay. After an initial OS install, a lot of background tasks have to run, Spotlight indexing has to run, all that stuff has to finish running. And then once that's done, it should not run as hot, and the fan should start to spin down after some time. So give it some time to run through those things and it should be a-okay. Now we'll talk about the dual booting system. Okay, now that we have our OpenCore Legacy Patcher and macOS installed, we have two separate drives. We have macOS High Sierra 10.13.6, and we have macOS Ventura on our secondary volume. If we want to go back into High Sierra, we can, because we are in a dual boot system now. All we need to do is click on the Apple and then click on Restart while holding down the Option key. Now, since High Sierra is a supported operating system on this 2010 MacBook Air, we do not need to boot through the EFI Boot Loader. We can go right to the default drive and then click on Enter or hit the arrow. And there we go, we're booting into macOS High Sierra. So on this system, we're running a supported operating system, and we're running a newer version of macOS with OpenCore Legacy Patcher. Now, to be able to go back to the operating system, the newer operating system, all you need to do is the same thing. Reboot, click Boot EFI, and then click on macOS Ventura, Sonoma, or whatever OS you installed. Okay, two more things. I want to show you how to remove that secondary volume if it didn't work out well for your Mac and you just want to be able to boot to this supported macOS. And then I'll show you how to remove OpenCore from your EFI partition. So let's click on Restart. And we'll hold down Option again, and let's plug in our USB drive. Now, we want to keep that USB drive around in case we have any trouble when we're working with OpenCore Legacy Patcher. Put that in a drawer or whatever when you're done with it, because it's a nice troubleshooting tool to have. So we're holding down Option, and we're going to boot to the macOS installer from the USB drive. We'll click on EFI Boot, and you can see the orange or the yellow means that it's the USB. We'll click on that. And then we will click on Install macOS Ventura. What we're going to do is we're going to use the disk utility to remove the secondary volume or partition. And once that's done, we'll be able to reboot back into macOS High Sierra, and then we'll be able to remove the OpenCore EFI folder part of the drive. Okay, now all we need to do is click on Disk Utility, Continue. And then we will click on View, and we'll show all devices. And then we will click on the top level drive, and then we'll click on Partition. And then here is the secondary partition that we want to remove. All we need to do is hit the minus button, and then hit Apply. And then Partition. Okay, the operation is successful. We'll click on Done, and all we have now is our macOS High Sierra. You can click on that partition again, and you can see we've got a full one partition disk and plenty of empty space that we recovered. So we will click Cancel, and then we will close Disk Utility, and now it is time to remove OpenCore from our internal EFI partition. Okay, now all we need to do is click on Apple, and we're going to restart. And then we're going to hold down the Option key, and then we're going to reboot back into High Sierra. So hold on Option, disconnect our USB drive now because we do not need that anymore. And then we can click on Macintosh hard drive. We're going to boot right back into High Sierra. Okay, let's log in. Okay, so what we need to do to be able to remove the OpenCore piece on the internal hard drive is we have to open up our terminal app. We'll go into Macintosh hard drive. We'll go to Applications, and then we will go into Utilities, and then Terminal. Now what we need to do to be able to load the EFI partition on our desktop to be able to modify the files is we're going to run a command to be able to mount the EFI. So what we want to do is we want to type in disk-util and then space list. We are looking for the EFI partition on our drive, and there it is. It is disk 0S1. So now what we need to do is we need to run sudo sudo space disk-util space mount /dev /disk 0S1. Enter. Password. Enter. And there it is, it's mounted. Now all we need to do is go to our desktop and we will click on the EFI partition. And now we have a Finder window open. Now we can always do this in Terminal, but I'm doing it in the graphical user interface Finder window so you can have a better graphical representation of what we're doing. Now we are going to delete two folders here. We are going to delete the system folder. Inside here is files for OpenCore, and you can see the boot EFI. And then we are also going to delete inside the EFI, not the whole EFI. We're going to delete just OpenCore. So first we'll go back and we're going to delete system. Right click or control click, or you can drag all the way to the trash, whatever you want to do. That's step one. System is now in the trash. The step two is go into the EFI folder, and then we're going to delete OpenCore. So right click or control click and then move to trash. And it's as simple as that. We don't even need to eject or anything. All we're going to do is restart, and we will now see the OpenCore Boot Loader is now removed. Restart, and then hold on that option key. And there we go. The OpenCore Boot Loader is fully removed, and we are back to 100% native macOS High Sierra on this 2010 MacBook Air. We'll click on that arrow, and now we are booting all the time back into High Sierra, and we're good to go. And that's it. We're back in macOS High Sierra. I hope this video helped you. I know there was a lot of different things that we went over, but I wanted to show you that there's multiple ways to be able to install OpenCore Legacy Patcher, whether you put it on an external hard drive, you put it in a second volume or partition, and you can dual boot with a native operating system that's supported on your Mac and test out OpenCore. If you have any questions, be sure to put those in the comments so we can give you a hand. And I also wanted to talk about the OpenCore Legacy Patcher Open Collective. If you have the means and you want to be able to donate to the developers that put all their hard work, you can go to this page, and I'll put this in the description, and you can basically either become a monthly contributor or you can give one-time donation if you would like. I also have a Patreon page myself if you would like to be able to join. There's a lot of posts that I make about the videos that I'm working on. I also answer a ton of questions, whether it's from troubleshooting your machine, upcoming video ideas, and there's a lot of other benefits too. So feel free to drop by or join if you would like to do that. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.